Hi Neil, how are you?
Good morning.
Excellent, good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So as a great introduction, please welcome Neil Wheeldon from BDP. I'll spit my words out in a moment, Neil. We've had too much coffee already that's gone up. And Neil's going to be going through updating the global supply chain, which is it's a key thing, especially with the times that we're facing. And it's a major sector that an awful lot of organisations globally across the world is looking at. So Neil, I'm going to hand it over to you. Can everyone have some questions and any queries you have, any help that you may have at the ready for after Neil's presentation. So Neil, over to you.
Great.
Perfect.
Good. So, see my screen.
Yeah, we're all good.
Yep. Okay. Good. Well, good morning, everybody. Let me get the out of the way.
Right.
Okay, so introduction to myself. My name's Neil Wheeldon. I'm Vice President of Innovation and Solutions for a company called BDP, which essentially means that I'm kind of chief product officer in the company, which means that I know enough about customers to be listened to. I know enough about technology.
Hi, Neil. Neil, sorry. Is there any chance we can turn the mic up a little bit? It's really quite faint. And we'd love to hear everything that you're about to say, so we don't want to miss anything at all.
Is this better?
Hopefully.
Is that better?
You got to love hackathons. But considering we're working on a tech hackathon, I messed up yesterday, and we're having some sound issues this morning. It's brilliant.
Is this better now?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
It's kind of about as loud as I can go. I'll try and talk a bit louder.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good. So back to where I'm at. Okay. So Chief Product Officer. Yes. Know enough about customers to be listened to. Enough about technology to be dangerous, and well, kind of enough about life to know when to shut up. So about BDP. It's a logistics company. We are supply chain orchestrators. So we don't own assets. All we do is own information and people and processes, and we use those capabilities to manage supply chain on a large global organization, predominantly in the chemicals sector. So pretty much anything that you have, whether it's a laptop or it's clothing or food that you're about to eat, has been treated with chemicals somewhere. We have managed that.
I'm really sorry, Neil. This is really faint. It's really faint. Oh.
Neil, may I suggest you perhaps try logging off and logging back on, see if that resolves it?
Yeah, that does sometimes work, actually. And then we'll start again. We'll start all over again. Gotta love live feeds. Hey, so whilst we're waiting for Neil then, how's everyone getting on with the morning briefing? Yeah, good? Do you like the playlist, by the way, everyone? Oh, I don't know if you guys are just here or not. No one's got the video on. We do love to see beautiful faces here as well. Don't be shy. Yeah, there we go. Hey, right. We've got one or two people. I'm loving going for a walk, by the way. That's great. That is great. Right. So let's try again with Neil. I'm going to actually do the introduction again because we are recording this. So fingers crossed, we're going to get this one done right. But as I said, that's much better. I can hear you so much clearer.
Okay, great.
Yeah, perfect. Right. So first of all, welcome to our 10:30 keynote speaker, Neil Wheeldon, Vice President from BDP International. Thank you very much, Neil, for joining us, and we look forward to your keynote.
Okay, great. So I guess the first question is can you hear me?
Perfectly clear.
Great. Okay. So let me begin again. Quick introduction. Neil Wheeldon. I'm Vice President of Solutions and Innovation for BDP. Since about 2019, I'm the Chief kind of Product Officer, which means that I own most of the development and innovation within the organization. A little bit about BDP. It's a privately held logistics organization. We don't own assets. We just orchestrate the supply chains on behalf of many of the world's largest chemicals and retail organizations. So essentially, we are an orchestrator ripe for disruption with the right amount of technology and focus. So that's kind of enough of the blah. That is the quick introduction. Now I'm really going to talk to you about where we are in supply chain management. What are some of the challenges that we are facing as an industry? And what are the use cases for an organization such as BDP? So, of course, the world is dynamic and complexity is increasing. Now, of course, in the recent year, this has really been brought into context or highlighted by COVID. You can't go away from the news without hearing something about COVID or the US elections, two of the things that are having a dramatic impact on the supply chain or a dramatic potential impact on the supply chain. But 2020 was going to be a year of change anyway. So behind the scenes, what you didn't see was that IMO, the International Maritime Organization, in January introduced new fuel surcharges for international shipments, meaning the cost of fuel to move goods from one part of the world to the other dramatically increased. We had an oil price war between April and May, brought on by COVID essentially, and some repositioning of Russian versus Saudi oil and a rebalancing of the whole oil industry, oil economy. We had changes in terms of the US-China trade relations, more tariffs, more embargoes, more need for paperwork to prove the origin of your goods and the shipment and management and execution of those. And of course, we have Brexit, which has suddenly meant that 44% of the UK trade, if we don't get a deal by the end of December, will suddenly be in a customs zone, requiring more paperwork and more transmission of paperwork to move your goods around. On the backdrop against that, we also had dramatic changes in the maritime shipping industry, where ocean carriers have consolidated across a number of years and have raised their rates. The rate to ship a container from China to Europe is double the price today than it was a year ago. So we have had some tumultuous changes in terms of supply chain management. And of course, that's against a global backdrop of radical technological change. So we have been talking about blockchain for a number of years. There have been a number of initiatives. If you believe the statistics, 55% of logistics companies, including my peers and myself, have invested in blockchain. As an organization, we have invested in blockchain. We have invested in IoT, so having assets being able to tell you what is happening as they go through their supply chain and their lives. And we're investing in machine learning and AI to help our customers predict better, quicker, and faster. So the world is complex. Supply chain management is complex, but on top of all of this complexity, we have all of the geopolitical nature of supply chains. A supply chain is often international. So whenever we're working with technology, whenever we're working with change, there are often government agencies involved. So we have a large changing nature of supply, we have a large changing nature of demand, and we have government influence. What COVID did was create basically a supply shock in Asia, followed by a demand shock in Europe. It exposed how volatile supply chains can be when a part of the supply is removed or demand suddenly decreases in part of the chain. And essentially, what we see is that different industries are impacted differently than others. Automotive saw a complete collapse in demand, whereas if you look at consumer goods, staples, electronics, we see a skyrocket in demand. We see demand moving from traditional store channels to online and online delivery channels. So all of these many facets we are managing from on a daily basis. That becomes a little bit harder when we look at the very nature of supply chains. Supply chains consist of a number of flows. They consist of the physical flow, the movement of goods from A to B. It consists of a document flow. Often many of these goods are flowing internationally. Documents need to flow with the goods. When you buy a good, you need proof that you've bought it. When you exit a country, you need proof that you exited the country. You need to supply data to governments for the customs, etc. And when you import a good, you actually have to provide paperwork for those goods when you import it as well. And certain goods coming from certain countries need even more paperwork to prove where they come from. Notice that I say the word paperwork because much of the supply chain is still predicated on paperwork and physical documentation. And below you can see just a simple list of some of the documents involved. So essentially, while I say we're an orchestration company, actually we're a paperwork management company. A lot of our business is around consolidating documents, checking them for accuracy, phoning couriers and contacting couriers to ship those paperwork around the world to ensure that the paperwork arrives before the goods arrive and the customer can take control over their goods. Then, of course, we have statuses. Everybody wants to know where their goods are in the supply chain. They want to know when they bought the goods, when will the goods ship, where are the goods in transit, when will they arrive, if they've arrived, when will they arrive at my warehouse or my customer. So a lot of our work is around providing statuses. Where is it? You know, if you go on a flight tracking tool and you go to an airline, you want to know whether your plane is going to be on time or late or delayed. And essentially, we're providing that for the very nature of the supply chain. And then, of course, the other layer is the financial layer. Where does ownership of goods transfer within the supply chain? When I buy my goods or when I take delivery of my goods? And so there's a financial flow that accompanies all of these different stages in the supply chain. And our role and the role of many companies is to manage that because it's a increasingly complex area. It involves governments, it involves many parties, it involves suppliers, and it involves data and documents. So essentially, supply chains are multi-layered, they're multi-party, and they are needlessly complex because many parties don't talk to each other. There aren't standards in our industry, though there is a move towards digital standards specifically within the status area of the business, and there are initiatives to move towards areas such as blockchain for documentation. But many of these things are either in their embryonic stage or in early adoption stage of implementation. So when I look at my business, if I take a use case for my business, for one customer, I may handle 45,000 shipments. So roughly 20,000 or so of those big metal boxes running around the world. An average shipment has 4.9 documents that need to accompany it, meaning for one customer, that can be 170,000 documents. Of those 170,000 documents, 22% of that go physically via pouches and couriers to destinations because the product is either going to a country that only accepts paper documentation or there's some specific needs around that cargo. But that's a lot of pouches of documents that fly around the world and consume carbon as we go. And then usually there's about 40 parties involved in these shipments. That can be the customer, it can be the carrier, it can be my own offices, my own people, government agencies, environmental agencies, reporting agencies, all of these parties involved in the international supply chain. If I scaled that to my entire business, then it's probably about 3 million more times shipments that I'm looking at. It's about 75 more million data points. It's considerably more data elements. And all of these, of course, require hours and a need for accuracy. If your supply chain or your documentation or your data is not accurate, then your cargo doesn't flow. So that is the use case I have for my business. This is the areas that we are consistently looking at for investment into technologies such as process automation and blockchain and AI and all of the other buzzwords that we talk about. So that's essentially the use case. Can a global supply chain be optimized by the application of blockchain? Absolutely, we believe so. But what we also are clear about is what are the needs. It must be secure. Any chain or any chain of custody of documents or data or financial transactions or information or communication within our business needs to be secure. For the supply chain to work, any transaction needs to be secure. It also needs to be connected. And by connected, I mean that for many customers, they use many different suppliers. They use many different companies, such as my own, and they transact with many different customers. An ecosystem that is not connected to all of those parties is not useful to our customers because they don't work in multiple modes. They don't work in multiple levels of connection. They need one connected ecosystem. The other point about the connected ecosystem is it also must be neutral. So many of the investments into blockchain are being done by companies such as mine or other logistics companies. But of course, there's always a concern about neutrality when your competitor builds an ecosystem. So a future ecosystem for blockchain in our industry, in the logistics industry, to be widely adopted across logistics companies and customers and suppliers needs to be neutral as well as connected. Timely, so information, of course, needs to be transmitted timely. This doesn't necessarily always mean real time. A lot of the transactions that we undertake have time lag in them. We are moving goods from A to B. Often our measure is days and not seconds. Precise, needs to be accurate. Information needs to be transmitted, and we need to know who transmitted the information, when they transmitted the information, and are they authorized to transmit the information, as a lot of this information is related to financial transactions, intellectual property, or the sale of goods in the supply chain. And of course, scalable. We operate globally. Our supply chains are global. A solution that only works in North America will not support the flow of goods around the world, which is what we need to do. We work across the world. We need to execute the same way in China as we do in Europe and North America. So any solution that is built or we execute as an organization has to be globally scalable. And of course, it needs to manage across echelons. So by echelons, I mean that supply chains have different levels. That can be the physical flow, it can be the data flow, it can be the flow of documents, and it can be, of course, the financial flow. Any solution that does not connect across the echelons disjoints the supply chain. You can't have a solution that only looks specifically at the event flow without somehow connecting it back to the other flows, because you have a disjointed picture of the supply chain. So when we talk about these things, of course, it does in certain cases lend itself to blockchain as part of a supply chain solution, or a capability that can be used as part of a multifaceted supply chain solution. And this, of course, is what we're all working to as organizations, but we have challenges around, can we build it with scale? Can we ensure that everything is connected? How do we get everybody to join on this? And does the business case that we create for it, does all of the documentation that we eradicate out of global trade makes life a lot easier. And then, of course, you have use cases around transmitting information relative to sensitive goods, such as the pharmaceutical industry, where you have IoT sensors linked to temperature-controlled goods. How can we then extract that information, link that to contracts, and allow the quick transmission of data and the execution of movements within that supply chain? So many things to look at, many opportunities, and a good opportunity for other organizations to come in and partner with companies such as ours to help us connect, be neutral, open up possibilities for our customers, and provide insight. And so with that, questions and answers, I am very much open to take your questions.
First of all, just wow. I've actually got so many questions. I've got loads. I've been taking notes. So there's 4 layers within the blockchain process, and that's physical, document, status, and financial. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, which if we're going to try and sort of help our teams in which direction to actually look at, we can't solve the entire supply chain process within one weekend. Our teams are going to have to concentrate on one specific area. From your perspective, which one is in desperate need for transformation?
So I would answer this from 2 perspectives. The documentation flow within a supply chain is in desperate need of transformation, but the challenge with document flows in a supply chain is it's a geopolitical problem. It's not a technology problem. It requires the ability to negotiate with, the US customs authority and the Chinese government, for example, to allow blockchain documents to be used for customs. So I've spent quite some time in this space. This is not an easy space because it's a geopolitical problem to solve. So whilst it's not a technology problem, the ability to implement such solutions is more in the hands of companies like Microsoft and IBM and some of the global powerhouses that can discuss these issues with governments. Right. Where I see as an opportunity is within the transmission of data and events. So, ships broadcast where they are. They provide a lot of information via AIS feeds, we call them. So data uploads every 15 minutes or so from a vessel or tracked by satellites. But can we use that information to, tell our customers certain things about when goods will arrive, and then in turn create activities or actions to be actioned in the blockchain? So a vessel arrival may actually automatically trigger a notice to a company to come and pick up a container from a port, or that the customer will, make space in their warehouse for their goods arriving. So these are areas where, there are some use cases. They are use cases that can be executed relatively easily, and then it builds a foundation that you can then build other capabilities off.
And so, did I hear correctly that for each shipment, there's 170,000 document equivalent of pouches, physical paper trail that goes through the system?
That's in relation to that specific use case. So that's if you divided 171,000 by 45,000, that's the number. So in an average shipment, there's 4.9 documents that accompany that shipment. So that's usually a packing list, a commercial invoice, a bill of lading, so basically a document of carriage. There can be customs documents. There can be documents talking about if it's hazardous goods, for example. If it's chemicals, you need very specific documents to talk about the good and how you deal with it if you accidentally set it on fire or spill it, etc., etc.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just getting my charger. It's that's why I disappeared from my desk. So there's 75 million data points that you mentioned throughout within your organisation. Is that just within yours or within the industry?
Within my organisation.
I don't
and
envy your job
probably
at
more
all.
or less depending on what day of the week it is. But
Wow.
we are basically an information orchestration company. We use information on one side of the world to trigger things on the other side of the world.
That's absolutely crazy. So you've mentioned as well at the very beginning that 55% of businesses are investing in blockchain, IoT, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. How do you see the industry actually shifting as a result of this investment, and how can, you know, what's the light at the end of the tunnel that you would hope for?
So, I mean, the light at the end of the tunnel that I see for the industry is first a coming together on some digital standards for the exchange of information within the supply chain. So as an industry, you know, unlike the airline industry where you have some very specific standards from IATA about how information moves around the world to support passenger and freight trade, we don't necessarily have that in other parts of the supply chain, such as the maritime supply chain or trucking in some parts of the world. So harmonizing to digital standards means that companies like mine don't need to work out other companies' spaghetti to communicate effectively. We have common standards. Once you have common standards, then you build on top of that. We can build, you know, automated transmission of information and documents. So in some respects, blockchain will help us, but only against a framework of having standards. And as we build those standards, we can apply use cases around AI, etc., because the data quality and the movement of data around the world becomes a lot easier to use, and then it's a lot easier for us to build use cases for new technologies around.
And so who, with info or implementing these standards, does that come from policy? Does that come from, you know, governments across the world actually collaborating within this?
It is a government organizational challenge. So, you know, a number of large companies are now coming together to start putting those digital standards together. But there's also some intergovernment work on that. The challenge around the documentation, as I said earlier, is really this is actually quite a political challenge. You have to connect the customs agents on one side of the world with the customs agents on another side of the world and get them to agree on standards. Not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, before we go down the political route, that's why blockchain is such a good thing, because we can bypass everything and do it all ourselves, isn't it?
Providing you get them to buy into the concept of blockchain, absolutely. So you actually see, you know, already some things happening. Of course, there is an organization or a capability called TradeLens. That's really been, I would say, one of the industry leaders in trying to connect chains and ports together. It has backers in Maersk, the world's largest shipping line, and IBM, of course. So it has the political footprint behind it to be able to work across governments and customs authorities globally to align on these standards.
Okay, so we are shifting in the right direction. I've probably got another 5 or 10 questions, but I'll put this open to the floor. Does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask?
I just had one come through on Slack, which I'll pass on. Just pop your questions either on Slack or preferably in Zoom. We've got, the question is, you know, because we aren't going to be able to solve the problem of blockchain and supply chain over the weekend, that's a given.
Absolutely.
But when we are considering a proof of concept, what do you think is the most important part of that? Because you're talking about getting these government bodies involved. I am paraphrasing a little bit. When you are, you know, considering the fact that you've got to sell it to your couriers, to your customs agents, which part of the concept do you think is most important to have a working version of when implementing that? Because if I went over to a customs agent with a complex smart contract, they probably wouldn't buy into that.
Yeah. So I mean, when we talk about documentation, the documentation flow. So there are two use cases essentially for that. So one is, of course, a documentation flow that replaces replaces physical documents in the supply chain by, digitizing the documents and, being able to push those through the supply chain and being able to connect them to the government agencies that require those documents. So that, if you like, is the most complex use case, because of course you need buy-in from both ends of both parties to do that. But as you can see from the kind of graphic on the left, that's about 22% of the volume of documents that we move. They're called original pouches. It means the original document is required to be moved around the world. You could then say the remaining 80% or 78% of documents are documents that we ourselves scan into our systems. We have digital copies of, and we have our document repositories that store those documents, and people can go in and access them. So there are use cases whereby those documents that we use internally, there's no government involvement in them apart from the fact that all the data elements need to be correct. Blockchain is a tool that can be used to replace our document stores. And if you can link that back to our processes to automate some of the processes that we may do, then of course the use case for me and my business is of course around productivity. So if I can increase the productivity of people going into my document store, looking for a document, pulling that document out, maybe grouping it with one or two more documents and sending that to a customer, if I can replace that with some smart contracts and some robotics around a blockchain, then of course there is a significant productivity gain for my business. So when we've been doing proof of concepts around blockchain, we've been looking at some of the documents we move internally, such as dangerous goods certificates. Those are certificates that accompany the movement of goods. They have to be formatted in a different way, but they don't need to go outside of the organization to government bodies. In many cases, it just needs to move with the goods, be assembled with the documents, and follow the document path.
Excellent, good stuff. We have a question from Virginia. Virginia, would you like to ask away? Don't be shy.
Put myself on the spot, didn't I?
You did, yes.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this talk. It's super interesting, and it's very it's kind of humbling to see the actual numbers, because in terms of what blockchain is and what supply chain is, I'm a business administration graduate, so I have the concepts in my head, but suddenly seeing kind of the actual application, real-time application of that is really interesting and very yeah, just very interesting to hear from actual experience. So thank you for that. My question was regarding, you had mentioned that kind of airlines have a consensus regarding documentation. And my question there was, is this like a historical development that is no longer something that can be applied to maritime transport in terms of processes they might have used to reach a consensus? Or is there something there that can maybe be applied into the maritime transport supply chain?
Yeah, so wow, very, very good question, and probably I could spend the whole afternoon talking about history. But essentially, I mean, both industries moved in different directions. Of course, when airlines were initially established, we had the convention, I think it's the Montreal Convention, around establishing a pan-government agency, basically to facilitate air travel. If we didn't have a agency that worked across all of the nations of the world, standardizing airlines and standardizing information that was required, and how planes were built and assessed, and airports were built and assessed, and all those things, then airline travel wouldn't be possible and the world would not be connected. Right. So really, those standards came out of ICAO and I8 and IATA to basically have a standard framework to allow, the world to work together. When it came to shipping, of course, there were conventions that were put in place, but these conventions were really related to, the types of documents that you would need to move a good from A to B. Bills of lading and the insurance criteria for, for vessels, and the management of vessels. And you had the International maritime organization that stands behind that and facilitates that. Where IATA and ICAO, or where IATA has really been good, is it's really recognized the fact that if you want to move passengers around the world efficiently and freight around the world efficiently, you need standards, and those standards need to be digital, because planes fly quick and you can't move a document as fast as you can move a plane. Where the maritime organization, where the maritime has been slower, is it's been a very competitive market. The standards have been there in terms of the documentation, but we haven't got to, or the industry didn't get quickly to digital standards for the movement of cargo.
Okay.
You could say that there wasn't really the burning platform, because ships move relatively slow. And if you stick your document pouch on with DHL, the plane will get there before the vessel. So, and it was a bit more competitive environment. There was more of a competition between major shipping lines, etc. What you do see now is that a body has been put together, a digital shipping standards body. It is kind of sponsored by the major shipping lines, and it's now moving the industry very quickly towards digital standards. So, that industry is in catch up. But through those digital standards, it will enable all of the other use cases. So a little bit of history, but we are getting there, and very quickly.
Brilliant.
That's awesome. Yeah, you actually took my follow-up question and incorporated it. Just I was going to ask if there was like a digital. You talked about geopolitical efforts, and I'm thinking maybe it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, where one thing is the political side and another thing is the technological side, or the business expertise side, where if from the businesses there is a presentation of a plan that is kind of widely consented between different big companies, then maybe there's a situation where the political side can kind of adopt what is being suggested rather than the other way around. So yeah, you were saying.
I will share after the presentation. I'll share the link to the site that has the information on this on Slack.
Perfect.
For you.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, amazing. Good question, Virginia. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, I am from India. I'm Siddharth Kumar. I'm from India. So
Hello?
yeah. My question is that we are actually making the application on blockchain insurance. Okay. So is there any kind of any limitation, like we need to use a public or private blockchain, or is there any kind of like limitation we need to use like AWS cloud service or IBM cloud service? So we need to know about that. So any limitations are there? Like only these tools are you are allowed to use?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, if you ask my perspective, then probably in my intro that you may not have heard, because I was kind of talking through a tunnel. Basically said my role in my organization is a CPO, Chief Product Owner, which means I kind of know enough about customers to be listened to, enough about technology to be dangerous, so don't ask me any technology questions, and enough about life to know when to shut up. So I think this is probably one of those ones. But as I said a little bit when I was talking about the use case for my industry, one of the challenges we have with blockchain is that, as I look at blockchain, I can't, I have reservations around being on a competitor's blockchain. So let's just say that one of my competitors created a blockchain. As an organization, would I want to be on that blockchain, knowing all my information is in there, knowing that, they're connected to my customers and they're connected to my suppliers? So, one of the things in the industry is there are people that are really, trying to push blockchain and trying to invest in it. And, there are different companies at different levels of maturity, but there is really a trust element to this around, there needs to be a kind of neutral blockchain ecosystem like the internet to get everybody really to buy in and trust to it. So when you talk about whether it's on AWS or IBM, I mean, IBM's Hyperledger, IBM's blockchain solution is a solution that underpins an organization or a company or an entity called TradeLens, which is a collaboration between IBM and Maersk. So they have created a blockchain solution. So they're in the game. I'm sure that there are capabilities on AWS. There are capabilities with Azure. I don't think it's necessarily about the underpinning technology. It's probably who is the organization that brings that technology to bear and what are the requirements for playing in their blockchain?
Because obviously you've got your public and you have your private ledgers. And so obviously when you have the transparency of the public ledgers, surely from your customer's perspective, I understand. And that's really interesting actually, because that's the same with all industry sectors. It's about that collaboration and how much do you trust it, and obviously with data protection, etc., and really industry secrets, your own industry secrets, how much you actually want to put out there. So from the transparency of a public ledger within your teams, do you know if they're really concentrating on their own private ledgers, so at least when one part starts or finishes, then you can then take over and the rest, or is it too interlinked that's too much of a mind map at the moment?
Yeah, it has to really be a private ledger in the sense that a lot of the information that we transmit is very commercially sensitive. Some of these documents have prices on them, and you could say that a block or a chain connects a supplier usually and a customer, or a shipper and a consignee, as we use the terms within logistics. And essentially, at a certain point in time, somebody buys the goods. Now, if somebody's reselling goods, of course, they don't want the person that's buying them to know what they originally bought the goods for.
Yeah.
So there are those concerns around, who can see what documents and at what point in the life cycle of a shipment.
Yeah. Okay. And Beline, I think you've got a question as well.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We
Hi,
can
how
indeed.
are you? Okay. Yeah, hello from Barcelona.
Barcelona.
Yes. Yeah, I thank you for your presentation. It was very, very great and a lot of great ideas. You mentioned that you made reference to international standards. So as we see the blockchain approach to the different continents like Asia, Europe, US, it can be different. How do you see those standards coming together? I mean, is there anything that is been happening now? And then when we have international standards, how do we bring that to the local level? Because at the end, that needs a local implementation. Thank you.
So I think that's the challenge that sits outside of blockchain. As I said, there's two use cases for blockchain. One is an internal challenge around how we manage and move documents in a productive way. The other is really, how do you connect governments together for customs purposes? How do you move goods, around that? And as I said, with that challenge, it's not a technology challenge. Actually, it's a kind of geopolitical challenge that requires, a lot of, discussions with governments. It requires you to prove the security that's part of your technology. It requires you to prove that you can support their standards. And a lot of these governments also have electronic communication channels. So some of the data that's in documents doesn't necessarily even need to be in a digital document. Can actually just be via, an API or an EDI message that fits with those government standards. So I mean, it's a bit of a three-dimensional puzzle, because it's negotiating with multiple parties and aligning standards. And then, also what the customs authorities don't want is 100 companies coming to them and, asking if they can use their blockchain. They don't also want that. They would prefer themselves to have more or less global platforms and global standards, so they don't have to talk to hundreds of companies about sending documents via blockchain.
Okay. And I believe, Robin, you've got a question as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So basically, the question is basically like, since so suppose you're a company, or like you're one of the suppliers or a manufacturer, and you want to like execute a transaction of like ownership, like you're a manufacturer, you've manufactured your that, suppose for an airline supply chain, you've manufactured an airline part, you've transferred it to the shipping agency, and you want to transfer the ownership of that. How user friendly is the process? So do you hire a developer team in order to like initiate that smart contract transaction, all of that stuff, or is it like just a click of a button for you guys to do that? How user friendly is it? How easy is it to create a smart contract for you in the supply chain industry?
So we have our own platform. So let's say a customer asks us to manage a supply chain on their behalf. They have suppliers that supply them, and we are asked to manage the supply chain on that behalf. That's our core business. That's what we do. We orchestrate the movement. So you could say we are the equivalent to a blockchain. Maybe in 1966 that was a typewriter. Well, it was a typewriter, and there was a lot of people with typewriters running around typing documents and trying to moving big stacks of paper around the world. Now you can see by the statistics that I shared that we've evolved since then. A lot of those documents are digital, and we moved them via digital pouches, etc. But there's still quite a large amount of paperwork that we still move around the world. So when we look at our processes, often a supplier, they will contact us to move the goods. They will send us a booking form, and then they will send us the documents linked to the goods. We will add those documents to our data repository, and then as the goods move around the world, we will move the documents with them. Now, where I see use cases in my business is, of course, when those documents get to the other side of the world, we will have people that check the documents and make sure that the goods are cleared, etc. So anything that we can do to allow our processes to be more automated and efficient helps my business to be more efficient and profitable. So we're always looking at use cases to improve that, and that's not necessarily blockchain. Blockchain is one of a number of technologies that we look at. Of course, robotics can help us do a lot. AI in terms of predicting data elements and pre-filling them and sifting data for us actually can do a lot for us as well. So we look at a whole lot of things, and we look at it from a process optimization perspective, but also to our customers, making sure that the documents are there when they need them, and they are correct and they are accurate, and it allows them to move their goods as well.
There's as I said, there's from the perspective of from ours on in terms of the hackathon itself, as I've mentioned sort of earlier, we can't change the world with this in one weekend. Is there any particular advice that you can give any of our teams or any of our participants where you think the urgency could be there, or any advice for this weekend of just a small pocket from your perspective, from your business perspective, of what you think would make a huge difference to you?
Yeah, I think one thing would be to look at maybe a document in the supply chain. So let's pick a document like the bill of lading, which probably if you Google it, you can find some examples of them online. Those documents, we get them at origin. They come from shipping companies, and then we move them from our origin offices to our destination offices via an online document repository. Being able to receive that document and doing actions with that document, so being able to check the data within it, being able then to trigger an event linked to that document. So that could be a "Hey, I've received it" event. Is the start of a use case that we often look at to say, how can we make that process better in our business? So just a small POC around a specific document, bringing it into a blockchain and being able to trigger a number of alerts or to check the content of the document. Often these documents are a PDF. So how can you validate those documents? We spend a lot of time looking into technologies to match the data that we have in our databases and systems against the PDF documents that we get from external sources. So these are areas that we look at a lot. We're often very interested in use cases around how accurate and effective and speedy we can be at ingesting and validating documents and triggering alerts.
Amazing. I think that's actually spot on for that. Our teams are going through ideation at the moment, and it is very much about the, well, given your background as well, where you said about the product aspect of it, actually really looking at it from the user experience and really following that journey through. And I think that's a perfect statement to kind of finish on, because this is what they really have to nail down, really have to look into, home into at this stage. But this has been amazing. I hope everyone here has really benefited from this. So thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for taking the time out. It's amazing that you've actually spent time with us this morning. I would ask everybody if you could show your videos up and give a round of applause for Neil, please, if that's good for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Enjoy the hacking and smooth sailing.
Yes, thank you very much, Neil. Take care.